Today we're at West Kennet Barrow. It's going to be one of our occasional shorts about an interesting site, and in many ways it deserves a much longer video, but it is a fairly small site. It's a very heavily visited site, well worth a look, and it's one of the best preserved long barrows in Britain. Mainly because it's right here in Avebury. You see Silbury Hill's just there. You park at the bottom of the hill. There's a nice little lay-by. If that one's full, there's a second lay-by on this side of the road. And you can pay to park at Silbury Hill, and it's a short walk. You just go through the gate, head across the field, and you actually cross the River Kennet here, because the River Kennet winds through the Avebury landscape. And I have to think that the presence of the river was part of the story as to why this landscape was selected for such a special site. I mean, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but within 2 miles of here, you have the Avebury henge, the 2 stone circles, one still there, one used to be there, the Adam and Eve stones, the sanctuary temple, which is a mixture of wood and stone, the only one I'm aware of in Britain, Windmill Hill enclosure, Churhill Fort, and there's a horse there as well now, and the avenue, and there was a second avenue, and of course here Silbury Hill, and a bunch of burials. But this burial's fascinating because it's one you can actually get inside, and whereas you can stand inside the doorway of somewhere like Wayland Smithy, quite short, or Little Kit's Cotty House, or even one of my favourites, Baldrum Long Barrow down in Kent. But here you walk along the bottom of the field, and it always feels moody and brooding when there's clouds here. These hills are steep, and there's 2 ridges of hills either side of Silbury Hill, and they're real hills, not man-made hills. But you head along this path, and it's quite an easy, accessible long barrow, which is one of the reasons I think that this is still probably the most visited long barrow. And you can see the little pagan offerings there. You often see them next to these sites. It's not quite so obvious here. If you go up the hill the other side of the sanctuary, there's normally fruit and flower offerings inside the boughs of the trees on the way up that hill. But there's normally some sign here that people have come and view it still as a significant site of a spiritual place, maybe where earth meets sky. And as you head up here, you can see this site was selected to be at the top of the hill. It's not a particularly difficult hill, but these barrows are normally at the top of a hill. And I always think that they were put there because these were revisited. These weren't a one and done single burial. These were family or communal burials, often over 30 to a couple of 100 years. And there's some suggestion that people revisited them, that a community kept in touch with their ancestors by visiting them, much as in some communities where people eat next to a grave, in Asia, say, or in Eastern Europe. There's a tradition of leaving lights on the tombs, particularly around All Saints' Day. And there are chambers. It's not actually a long barrow simply, it's a chambered long barrow. So there were a series of chambers off the entrance, and each one actually had remains in them. I must admit, when I visited here the first time, I wondered what did they find in here. And there's some vague commentary on the board. I mean, this is a small site at the top of a hill. There's not a museum here. There's some good, simple boards explaining what you're seeing, but obviously they can't go into it. It's not an essay. But if you watch our Monday Museum tour next week, we're going to the Wiltshire Museum and we actually see the remains that came from West Kennet Long Barrow. And I'm not including them in this video because you should come back on Monday if you want to see them. But the chambers, each chamber was probably for a community, a part of a community, a generation. And these pastoralists who lived around here built this monument on top of this hill. It's not, it's not like building Stonehenge or Silbury Hill. It's doable. But clearly there was a decent effort. They define the base. There's a series of stones at the front. There's a capstone. And underneath that capstone, you enter into the chamber too. And you can actually walk through those chambers. It's quite high for a chamber tomb. If you saw the video of the chamber tombs we visited in Wales a little while ago, they were much shallower. Now, you can't go into those, but you would be crawling on your hands and knees if you were to do so. Even Wayland's smithy, I don't think I could fit inside it. If you check out that video, I found it way too short for me. But here it's quite a decent size, and yes, it has been partially reconstructed, but it's been kindly reconstructed. It's not a kind of Disneyland, this is what it would have looked like. They've put the stones straight and they've just neatened it up a little bit, but it gives you a very good idea of what it would have looked like. And it's a good example of a long barrow. It's actually part of what's called the Cotswold Seven, as in the Severn River group. And there's a cluster of about 30 centred on Avebury. But this is the easiest to visit, enter and interpret. As we reach the brow of the hill, you can start to see West Kennet Long Barrow and its local sarsen megaliths along the front, and then Neolithic limestone that was imported from Cotswolds used for the sides. And then it's a long rectangular earthen tumulus. And inside these chambers in the tomb, they buried between 3670 and 3635 BC. There was a mixture of men, women, children, adults, and seems to have come to a hiatus. And then 3620 to 3240, it began being reused. So it looks like it got reopened and used by a different group from the area. And here you see it. It's about 100 metres long and 20 metres wide, and probably about 4 metres high. There's a bit of a kink in the ditch around the side, and it suggests that it's actually extended, and you can kind of see it there on the hump. There's a little dip, and the suggestion is that the first section was built and then it was extended. But the tombs don't actually go all the way back. The tombs are well within this first section. And you see here the front stones. These are the megaliths that create an entry and at the same time give a frontal definition. But it's a striking tomb. And these have been put back up. At the end, I'll put in a little video of when we visited Coldram Long Barrow, and you can see that would have looked a bit like this, but the mound has completely disappeared. What I like here, and Wayland's smithy, is the presence of the mound. It gives you the fuller picture. There's always some degree of reconstruction. Wayland's smithy has very clearly defined dry stone wall all the way round, which, if you look at our video of the Pitt Rivers Museum, there's a brief shot of an archaeological model of Wayland Smithy, and it doesn't have that clearly defined wall around. So some level of reconstruction has had to happen. There you can see curbstone, and it's a very naturalized landscape. It's allowed to grow with flowers and grass. There's plenty of bees this time of year. The fields start about 20 metres from the mound itself, and those are just normal fields that are farmed like usual. There is actually another long barrow further along the ridge, but to get to it you have to cross a farmer's field with no path, so there really is no meaningful access to it. And I don't like wandering through farmers' fields. I think it's disrespectful. So we'll have to leave that one for now. But here you can see it's a long barrow. It's a very aptly named structure, 100 metres, and these curbstones on the east side. And there is a ridge that you can walk along, and most people do. It's interesting with the way this barrow was expanded, because some long barrows seem to have started off as shrines. There's several in South Street and Beckhampton Road. Apparently, those, when they were excavated, had shrines inside which seem to have been expanded out to these chambered tombs. And when I look at these chambered tombs, I always think that they're like a mortuary temple almost for a community. There you can see Silbury Hill, and we're heading up the back. You can just wander along the top and you can see all the tourists do it. You're not damaging it. Silbury Hill you're not allowed to walk up, and I never have and I never will. But you do see people climbing it, and it really is bad because Silbury Hill is fragile and has already had some internal collapse. So climbing up and standing on top of what is actually a polystyrene core is not a good idea. But here there's a path that winds along the top, and you see a feel for what the shape would have been. This barrow has changed a lot over 5,000 years, unsurprisingly, but it's about as close as you can get in a long barrow in Britain to what a chambered barrow tomb was like. And now we're going to head inside, because I'm sure you've been waiting. I've kept the inside till last. But as we get to the front here, if you look at that small concrete circle, that has glass in it. So it's a light source. It allows some natural light to enter into the tomb. And as soon as you go round the front stones, you're into these chambers. You have the central shaft, and you have these chambers to the right, and there are actually some swallows nesting here. Not at all bothered by the tourists coming to look at the long barrow. But down here, that's one chamber. Then here is another chamber. And you can see it's a mixture of stones and walling in between. Some of this has been reconstructed. And here's the other chamber. And each of these chambers had burials inside them. There's another chamber here. Now, did have to have some light on so that you could actually see inside, because it was very dark. This construction is much more sophisticated, or let's say complete, than I've seen in any other chambered tomb, apart from possibly Stony Littleton. However, I would say that this has been heavily reconstructed. And it's hard to tell how much the parts have been put back, but they were in the shape of these chambers. When you see our video on Monday of the Wiltshire Museum, you'll see how the chambers were like that when they found them, and there is a reconstruction, although it's a little squeezed to fit inside the space of the museum. But it's a lovely spot, and if you think this was a place of burial and a place of memorialization where communities would visit their ancestors and presumably sit and eat and feast and hold rituals linked to their ancestors. But it's a very striking sight, and I hope you'll come and have a look as well. Please do like, follow, subscribe. Come back on Monday for the Wiltshire Museum, where you're going to see a lot of finds from West Kennet Barrow.